And maybe we could start with some conversation. Just people, how did you experience the film? Where did you go with these images? How did you perceive them? What did it cause you to reflect upon? I mean, because I think that's one of the real strengths of experimental film is it becomes personal for people. I mean, different people respond in different ways. Different images speak to people in different ways. Yes, in the back.
I really liked that you were on vacation sometimes. And then, I felt like that was, the story started out sort of like dealing with your ailing parents, and then you were taking a break and trying to maybe nurture yourself. I know it's not all chronological, but it just felt like there was this sort of break time in between. But then towards the end, it felt like you got to know your community more, or throughout, like it just felt like I could picture where you lived and like what the sounds and the sights were and your connection there. And then that really transitioned sort of nicely for me into COVID and just feeling like your surroundings, but then you weren't really on a break anymore, but then you kind of were. So anyway, those were just some things that I just felt like I experienced.
It was chronological though.
Okay, but like, I mean, not scene by scene by scene, or was it scene by scene?
Kind of, yes. I mean, within a year, maybe I put one thing a little later than when it happened, but basically it was chronological.
Like Grease came out of nowhere. I wasn't really expecting Grease.
Well, for me also. That was exciting.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
This is a remarkable film. It's remarkably personal in ways that are really hard to imagine. I'm wondering whether you had the footage first, because you took footage of different things and then assembled it afterwards, when you discovered the themes of this film and how to organize it accordingly. Also the relation between text and film at different moments. I mean, this is organized in so many different ways. There are so many networks of association in it that one has to see it many, many times, like seeing a painting. So I'm just wondering what the process was, the footage first, the ideas first, and then the footage, how it worked.
So you heard the question, he asked basically how it was organized, did I have the footage first? When did I think about how it was going to be organized and about the use of the text? So, thank you. It started with that first shot where, for whatever reason that day I was thinking, oh my God, I'm such a mess, I never relax, I'm always worried about things, whatever. And I had that shot in bed where I'm looking at the fan and breathing and all that. And so that made me think, well, then let me go do something about this. So I had the first idea of going out every day and trying to find nice things. Like if I'm making films about things that are rough, or I'm looking at the world in a critical way, let me go look at the world in a nice way. So I went out and I shot the guy running through the fire hydrant. And the next day I went to Central Park. I had to be up there anyway. I went to Central Park and I shot the girl being drawn. And the next day, blah, blah, blah. And after a while, I'm not that methodical, so I thought, well, I can't really do this every day. So then I relaxed that plan a bit, and I would, at times when I felt like it, I went out to see what I might find. And then also I started having my camera at times when I went somewhere that I thought might be something I would want to record. So an early example of that was when I went to see Diane when she was in the hospital right after her failed surgery for her brain tumor. So at that point I thought, oh, I'm not just collecting nice things, I'm also collecting other things that are very real. And so I kind of went along like that, and I didn't, it was, I don't remember, because I did this over a period of 5 years, so there was a point, obviously, maybe let's say after a year of having footage, or 8 months, or whatever, that I thought, now let me see what happens when I start putting them together. And then I started, again, in a really kind of stupid way, the way I started thinking, oh, I'll film every day. And so because I kept a record of how I shot, when I shot, And so I started out having I agonized over these title cards. Oh, what color would they be and what kind of font would I use? And then I would have like August 18th, 2006, Brooklyn, New York, September 7th, wherever. And I did all of that for a long time, and then I probably showed it to somebody because I tend to do that. And they said, this is so stupid, it's just like, da, 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 da. And I agreed with them, but I also wasn't sure how I could make things weave together without those kind of little title cards. Suddenly it was just like, oh, we're going from Diane in the hospital to whatever comes after that, So then it really just became this very long process of trying to make things move along. And that's what editing is, and sometimes if you have planned things ahead of time, you're better off because you can think, this shot should definitely go after that one. And when you're doing something like this, you can't do that, so you have to do other things. And then, after about 3 years, I thought I was done. And I ended it at the moment in the film where there's the block party, and I'm in bed and I say, ugh, I think I have a cold, and I look out the window and I had a title card that said, well, now it's, whatever later, and blah, 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 and I sort of ended it. And then I stopped working on it because I worked on a really huge website about women editors, and I was teaching, and I'm also working on a book. And then I thought, well, wait a minute, and then COVID was happening, and we all had a little extra time, and I thought, hold on a minute, I finished a film, and it kind of can't show during COVID, but shouldn't I at least really finish it? And I looked at it, and it was about 45 minutes long, and I thought, well, this sucks. This is not at all finished. But by then I had a lot more footage, because somehow I kept shooting, even though I thought it was finished with the film. And so then I threw tons more stuff into it. And it was almost 2 hours long, and then I had to do the really fierce cutting down. And so at some point I finished it. And the thing with text is that was a long answer, sorry, but the thing with text is that I use it a lot. I've used it in many other films in different ways. And one of the things about, I made a film called Gut Renovation about Williamsburg. And that was sort of the first time that I was working in the computer that I could be much freer with the way I worked with text, but because before that it was on film, and you had to make acetates and all that. And suddenly I could really rewrite. And then the film right before this is called I Cannot Tell You How I Feel, which is about us moving our mother from Chicago to New York. And then I really did a lot more of different ways of sort of talking to you or telling you something that I'm thinking in that film. And so that kind of carried over into ways that I was doing it in this film. Not as much actually as in I Cannot Tell You How I Feel. But yeah, I think it's a very rich, sort of endless thing to mime, the way you can speak to people aside from voiceover or camera, audio, whatever. So, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to sort of acknowledge the title and how much I enjoy. It's just like different episodes in different people's lives, and it's just like today, and now another today, with somebody else, or with you, and I liked also the text, just for the reason you said, because it was always interesting photo, but then little commentary from, oh, God is saying, I feel like shit today, or, you're speaking to us while we're seeing these images of life today. So I just want to thank you. I love the effect.
Thank you. Sir?
How did you think about how did you treat the dark and the light? Has this kept us going? This story interesting?
Meaning emotionally dark and light or visually?
No, not visually.
Emotionally.
It's obvious. But emotionally.
Well, that's what life brings us. You know, I kind of went with, that's why I was saying it is chronological. I went with how things happened. And, you know, there were decisions I had to make about what I was going to leave out, because I did leave out a lot of stuff. But I just had to, you know, confront whatever the dark moment was when it was there, and then move on to, I don't know how to, you know, it's how life is. How do we, and obviously on a day when something really great is happening, we can be thinking something that's really upsetting. We can remember somebody who passed while we're at a party. You know, so things can be simultaneous in our experience, in who and how we are, but in a film they have to move, you know, they can't be at the same time. So it's just something to juggle with a lot. Yeah.
I really appreciated, as my neighbor said, the balance that you had between sadness and happiness, and sadness and appreciation of what we see around in the world around us. Having been through a week like that, I found it very helpful.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to, in response to Jay's question, from the very start of this film, there's an intuitiveness to it, and it has me glued the minute you are moving the image vertically and breathing, evolving. And it felt throughout, you know, I'm watching the day-to-day life of others. I'm sure all of us can relate.
Thank you.
And I think your sink and swim is very similar. You have that approach, that intuitive.
But, thank you, but after the moments of intuition are many, many more moments of really hard work.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like, there are always moments when you're editing that you think, oh, maybe I'll put that, and you do, and it just works.
Yeah.
But most of the time you think that, and it doesn't work. And then you have to really fight it. And it might be one frame, it might be, you know, 5 seconds, whatever, but there's a hell of a lot of hard work.
How do you compare your process to what you imagine to be the process of writing poetry?
Okay, so there was a year, back in like 1992 when Kathy and I were broken up and I was at a residency and I was working on transcribing all of the, like 40 hours of interviews, and I was bored out of my mind, and I thought, oh, I'll write some poetry. And so for a couple of weeks I wrote poetry. So I can't really compare it beyond that experience, which was laughable. So I don't know, because I don't write poetry.
Yeah, I mean, but experimental film is sometimes seen as sort of poetic cinema, which is not to say that it's like writing poetry, but there are conditions of poetic articulation that
Right.
are seen as kindred, you know, elements in it.
Well, that's true. I think the ways, and also I don't read a lot of poetry, but I certainly have read poetry in my life, and there are so many different kinds of poetry.
Mhm.
But thinking about the ones that appear to be more free form, even though the person has probably labored over them, I think it's true that there are ways that they can condense, or they can use an image in a really striking way to maybe stand for a lot of things. And I think, you know, working in film in this way, you can do similar things.
Mhm.
You don't
Yeah.
have to spell everything out, or you don't have characters, you have moments,
Right.
like vivid images in a poem. So,
Mhm.
yeah, I see a relationship.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
I heard one of you say you wanted to know how we experienced it. So I may fumble a bit, but when I was 35, I had a huge crisis in my life. It still is part of me, an occasional panic attacks. But that's when I learned how to really be in the moment. I mean, literally, when a panic came up, of like, okay, talk to yourself. I'm sitting in the chair. Now I'm getting up. Now I'm walking over to epilogue, that opening the wood stove, to get through that moment. Another example is when panic comes on, and just stop and look at the wall, look at the color, and I would try in my mind to figure out if I had paints, how would I make that color, just to get through that moment. And so the concept is living in the moment, just like dinner, and if something happens that, like, you're walking on a beach and a bunch of trees are falling, you know, it's horrible, and you don't know how you're gonna get through, but you know you're gonna laugh about it later, and it's gonna be a dinner anecdote that will for all of your friends. Being able to capture that moment of confusion or whatever, and yet see that it's a story, and that it's just a little moment, but it's a story. And that's what I got from it. But then the thing that I struggle with, and that I have to be reminded of, that I caught in your film about your bones, is that at the same time you have to think about the future. It's like, you gotta stay in the moment and appreciate the little things, but I gotta go for a walk every day too, or the 23rd is when I have to pay my bills. And so for me, it's like speaking two languages. When I speak Italian, or if I'm in Italy for a month, I can feel my brain switch, and I can't even speak English anymore. And as soon as I come home, within 3 days, I can't speak again. And I can physically feel the brain switch. And that's kind of how it feels when you're living in the moment. Like all of your snippets did, which I loved. But somehow you move forward.
Yeah, well, everybody heard that, right? Yeah, I know what you're,
How I
I know what you're talking about, yes. And the other thing for me, and I think people, this works in different ways for different people, is, and I say that in the film, you know, at one point I say, it's when I'm filming that I'm in the moment. And so I put that in the film, and then when I started showing it, somebody said, yeah, but is that true? Because you're actually stepping out of the moment when you start filming. And I said, yep, that's the paradox. Because you are, so, okay, we're in this room, and I've suddenly decided that I want to, you know, get a little shot of you while he's asking somebody a question. And so I start filming you, and I'm really concentrated on you, and I have left this moment to make that moment. So you kind of can't, you know, I can't fix that paradox. But yes, I think it's always hard. I mean, why is there Buddhism? You know, I mean, for thousands of years, people have been trying to figure out how to be in the moment. And sometimes we succeed, and sometimes we don't.
Although film naturally, and maybe music too, but you know, captures moments. I mean, separately from theater, in some ways differently than theater, and that are sort of ephemeral and fleeting, but also evanescent and staying. I mean, it's like a strange medium. It's part of what's the attraction of it. So I think that part of what you're saying, you know, resonates for me, because you describe a series of moments and a series of, you know, feelings, and you know, all of that. I mean, there's this notion of the past being present, you know, and I think that certainly Sink or Swim sort of captures that too. And so the issues of time and being inside or outside of it are all sort of relative, I think. And for me, experimental film, or well done, or poetry too, takes you to those places where you lose some of the grounded, literal sense of this is what it is and that's all that it is, to the point where it becomes sort of fleeting, and you know, that you can revisit that. I mean, somebody argued once, we are, at right now, you are all the ages you've ever been. You know, that you are.
Young people don't believe that about older people, but it's true.
Yeah, no, it's true. Yeah, and so these are interesting thoughts that sort of, part of why I like, you know, Sue's films, and also experimental film, and the arts generally. I mean, as they take us these places that actually do continue to vibrate, you know, in their own way. So
Well,
that they're not lost moments.
Oh.
Yep.
I was just gonna say something
Finish
quickly.
that thought,
That, but also, I mean, but the other thing about something like this is that, or how we remember things, is that we have thousands of experience, I mean, billions of experiences, and how many of them do we remember, and why do we choose to remember certain ones and not others? And so, also when you're making a film, you've got tons of moments, and then there you are editing, and it can't be a 45-hour film. So there's also a lot of selecting that goes on, and it could be, I could make an entire other film called Today with all other footage that I have, you know, so it's a little bit of a game. But anyway, you were gonna say
It's
something.
a very different topic, but the duration of text cards, I often felt like they were too quick.
Oh,
And I
sorry.
want more time to, like, I'm enjoying the visual image, but then I'm obliged to read because I don't want to lose that, but then I don't quite, sometimes I would miss the transition. And then when the credits roll and you have like a pool toy and I know what's going to happen, I'm not going to see, that pool toy is going to block what I haven't gotten to. And so I'm a perhaps slower reader than your audience, you could ask the rest of them, but I would like, if a filmmaker's decided that text matters, then I want to be able to receive it.
It's, okay, and I hear you, because it is a eternal problem about duration of text.
I could imagine.
And so,
I'm not a
yes,
filmmaker,
so
I was
I
just curious.
show it, well,
Yeah.
I'm always showing stuff as I'm working on it to various friends and whoever, and that's one thing, I'm like, could you read it, could you read it, could you read it? And I also know, for example, my partner's a really fast reader, so I don't even ask her.
Yeah.
But other people, and I really try and hopefully hit a good mark, but obviously for some people it fails, and that is a problem. There's no sort of absolute, you know.
Yeah, and it's kind of like with a foreign film, like I'm gonna need the subtitles, but I'd rather not have them because I can't take in all the visual imagery because I'm beholden to read. But I love that you have the text cards and that they're very beneficial and anchor us and give us another angle and insight. So I like them. I would go for a slightly longer duration. Unless you want us to have the experience of like, oh, I just missed that. And
No,
that's the way life is.
I don't want that experience.
You'll never know that was supposed to be.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't want the film to end. I was enjoying it so, and I appreciated all the things that people have said about the good moments and the challenging moments, and I especially like the cross-cultural framework of the whole thing, much of it, and many takeaways for me personally. But I wonder why did you create the film? You haven't explicitly said that, so did you have an objective in this whole thing?
Well, I wondered whether if I tried to collect footage with this notion of being present, whether it would help me become more present. You know, and I really, okay, art therapy is a really great thing for people who need art therapy. What I do is not art therapy. Sometimes people kind of think of it in that way because I do stuff that's very personal. But what I learned a million years ago is that if you're doing art therapy, you know, you're teaching people to deal with their problems through art making, it's a completely different process. They aren't sitting there saying like, you know, I don't think this composition really works. It's not about skill and craft, it's about using materials and images to express, you know, your emotions. And that's very different from making a film. And I also learned years ago that even though I have made other films with a similar intent, not to be in the moment, let's say, but to think about, oh, what does it mean to go through a really traumatic breakup? What does it mean to have a father? Whatever it might be. And I imagine that spending a couple of years really drilling down and dealing with it is going to free me from it, and it never really does. So in this case, I would say I'm not very good at being in the moment after having spent 5 years making the film. But so what, you know.
Yeah, I was curious, you mentioned yesterday that it was Sing one that you scripted it. And I was wondering how many of your films are scripted. This one you mentioned that you didn't really have a script.
Right. So it's a little bit of a difference between 16 millimeter and video. So when I was working in 16, and I made a whole bunch of films in 16, and given the difficulty in editing and even producing material, it was really important to have a lot of things sort of under control. It couldn't be as free form. And also for other reasons, like I was learning how to do all of this, that I spent a lot of time writing, voiceover text, whatever it was, or scripts. And then when I got into the computer, I realized that I had a little more flexibility and a little more freedom. And there were some films I made early on when I was working in video where I still set up some kind of a structure beforehand, but I'm trying to think. So there was a film I made called Seeing Red in about 2007, and I decided I was going to make something about the color red, and long story, there I was with the camera on me, and I was ad-libbing. I was just saying stuff. And I did a bunch of those I did those sessions, so to speak, over a little period of time. And then I went out and I filmed red things, and then I put it together. And so I hadn't planned at all what I was going to say, and I edited down a lot of what I was going to say, but it was totally extemp. And so since then, I have tended more to, let's say I talk while I'm filming, which happens maybe a few times in this film, but a lot in the film about my mother. And so sometimes I think maybe I should make another film where I plan everything ahead of time and really write a script and rewrite it 1,000 times. But that's not as much what I'm doing now. And I think there are virtues to both, and sometimes it's necessary and sometimes it isn't. Sometimes you can do something in this kind of way rather than in that kind of way. So I don't have like an idea of, that was a better way to work or this is a better way to work. It's just sort of what the project demands of you or asks of you, Yeah.
I think you like the circus.
Oh, I love the circus.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Love the circus. And you know what? At a screening, I showed it in New York a couple months ago, and one night there was a guy there who worked at NBC, and after the show, he raised his hand and he said, "Breaking news, just yesterday, Ringling Brothers announced that they were coming back."
No.
And without any of the animals. But they are back. And they haven't come to New York yet. I looked at their tour, and they were like in Maryland and whatever. But they have decided to start up again without the animals. I know there must be people in the room who think it's not good to have animals in the circus, but I'm sorry, that's an ethical problem I can't get past because I love the animals in the circus. And they treat them very well. Yes, question.
I don't know if you can answer this because it's a sort of long question, but when I was growing up, I don't think there was ever in my mind any thought or knowledge of experimental filmmaking. So I just wonder how you grow up and become an experimental filmmaker. I mean,
Okay,
what different
judging
iterations?
from your age, I'm going to say there was experimental film when you were growing
I
up.
know there was.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
But you weren't aware of it.
I'm trying to figure out how one becomes so convinced of one's own authority that one can make a film and assume that what one finds interesting and compelling will also translate to an audience and be
Well,
communicable. Because
that's-
I watched this, and it was your life, not my life, but I was compelled by it.
Oh,
And I just wonder how you get to that point in your existence that you can do that.
Okay, so I would say that same question could be asked of anybody who does traditional documentaries or traditional narrative films. It's like, or who writes novels or writes poetry. I mean, some people, for whatever various reasons, at some point feel like there's something they want to say or show, and they go ahead and do it. So I'm no different than anybody else in that regard. I should add in painters, sculptors, dancers. And in my case, it was a little fluky. It was just that I was trying to be a photographer when I got out of college. I had moved to New York. Somebody asked me to come to this Super 8 workshop with her, and it was only for 3 nights, and I went with her, and then she never went back, and I went the other 2 nights, and it was sort of and I hate those kinds of stories, like, there was that moment when I knew. So it wasn't quite like that, but there was definitely the moment where I thought, whoa, this moves, and you can have sound, and I really love photography. I'm not in any way, comparing them and thinking that photography is lesser by any stretch of the imagination. But somehow I didn't know that when I was absolutely dedicated to the idea of being a photographer, that there was a part of me that wanted things to move and make noise, And so it was really just kind of a simple like, oh, cool. And then, it took me a while to sell my enlarger and, start shooting Super 8. But it became, immediately clear to me that there were all kinds of possibilities. And that was like 42 years ago. So, maybe, and you still, one always has a lot of doubts. One always worries that the thing you're working on isn't good enough, and blah, blah, blah. So that has never changed, but, you do build up more of a vocabulary, more of an understanding of the audience. And I would say, you're a very patient audience because I'm going on and on. I would say that one of the things that happened, there were 2 things that happened really early, and one was that I made a film called Gently Down the Stream, which is very experimental. It has images framed within black, and it has words that move on the screen because I scratched them into the emulsion, and it's really wacko. What I'm saying is really wacko, and it was only my 4th film, and I showed it at this place in New York, this experimental film place, and afterwards this Scottish guy came up to me who was straight, so the film has lesbian content in it, and this guy comes up to me, and he's this straight, white, foreign Scottish guy, and he says, and it was based on dreams, and he said, I have dreams exactly like that. And I said, how is that possible? And, we chatted, and I went away thinking, oh, I worked with material that was very specific to my thinking, experience, whatever, and somebody else just, in his case, he said they were like that, but as I kept working, I realized or recognized that people translate films, and I do that. When I'm watching a film about an Indonesian, old Indonesian fisherman, I'm not, I just translate it in whatever way so that I can understand what's happening. And I've seen over the years that people do that. They'll take a film of mine that's about cars and say, I call this my red shoe film because I had the same experience that you had with cars, and I had literally, that's what a friend of mine calls it. So, but the other thing has to do with thinking about the audience. And I started out making experimental films in an environment in the late 70s, early 80s, where a lot of people were making what's called structural films and other kinds of films, experimental films, but structural films. And I would sit at the Millennium and the Collective and just be like, God damn it. Because they would be so, what is the word? They didn't invite you in at all. And sometimes I could think, oh, this is interesting, yeah, he's got this system, and it's every 3rd frame is black, and
like Ernie Gare, a filmmaker like that.
Yeah, I like some of Ernie's films, but still, and I thought, I feel like these filmmakers, I'm going to say that most of them are men, weren't really, they just felt like they could do whatever they wanted, and people take it or leave it, but I hope you really like it, because actually I want to be a well-known filmmaker, and really not thinking about what the experience was. And that made such an impression on me, and so I when I'm shooting, I'm already thinking about you. I'm thinking, if I pan the camera this way, are you gonna notice the dog's tail wagging? You know, I'm constantly, you know, thinking about how somebody is gonna see that. And also when I'm cutting it, and clearly, I chose title's on long enough, but you know, in other ways, just will it flow so that you stay with it, you don't get thrown out of it. So, yeah, that's.
Well, you answered my question just by telling me that you're thinking of someone watching it at the same time.
Totally, yeah.
But an experimental filmmaker is not, generally speaking, it's not the same process as doing a completely linear narrative or even a linear documentary that is a fixed item that is presented to an audience where much of the audience will have a similar experience watching it also. I mean, experimental filmmakers are taking chances and also needing the audience that comes to it to be open to their own experience of the film, which is a fundamentally different idea. Not that some narrative and documentary filmmakers don't also consider that. I mean, I'm a director of narrative film, and I want to render a performance that is open-ended to the point where audience members could perceive different ways of seeing it. But nonetheless, I'm also resting on some narrative conventions so that when it plays, you know what to expect. And so part of what is, I think, refreshing about experimental film is that it allows you to go into liminal space where you find your own connections and you find your own meaning. But yes, it's the job of the filmmaker to put something out there that is nonetheless, you know, it moves to you and allows you to meet it at least halfway.
Which is, and you can stop soon because it's been long, you've been very patient, but I think it's also about having people come in the room while you're working on it, you know, not just sitting there like God thinking, wow, what an incredible film I've made. Because my experience is, I think that, and then somebody comes in and says, well, you are so not done with this film. And it's hard, but it has made such drastic differences in every film I've made. To hear, you know, my partner, or my friend who's a writer, or my friend who's a really great editor, or whoever it might be, come in and be really tough. You know, that's what you need. So, yeah.
Well, thank you for your patience and generosity.
My words exactly.
I do want to just mention something quickly. Somewhere in here. Okay, so I have a few of these left. I have some cards left, but about 2.5 years ago, I made this website called Edited By, which is easy to find. You just write in Edited By, although that doesn't always show it up right away. But it's about women film editors. And what happened was I have been teaching, and I had a chapter about editing from a good production handbook written by people I know who are very cool. And I'm looking at the editing one, and it says, and in Hitchcock's North by Northwest, and in Buñuel's Phantom of Liberty, and they're talking about all these great editing moves that were happening in these very famous films. And I thought, well, who's the editor? Why are you mentioning the director? So I annotated the chapter by going to IMDb or wherever and finding out who the editor was. And I discovered that at least half of the films they were talking about, including The Wizard of Oz, were edited by women. And I thought, if I don't know this, and I've been making films and being an editor of my films for decades, how many other people don't know this? And so I then spent about a year making this website, and there are about 100 what I call main editors, like very famous, Thelma Schoonmaker, Scorsese's editor. But then the woman who edited 20 of Werner Herzog's films, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there are a lot of those. And then there are about 100 what I call filmmakers who always or sometimes edit, because halfway through the process I thought, oh, wait a minute. I know a lot of people like me who also edit all their own work, but they don't have a job as an editor for other people. So it's sort of two sections of the website. And then I made a film about it for the launch party, which is about 60 minutes long. And then I made another one that's 90 minutes long that you can see on the website because all these people wrote me afterwards and said, well, what about so-and-so? I was like, shit. So I had to add all these people, and then I had to make a new film, but it's very cool to watch it. It's not really like a film. It's basically strung together starting in 1924 with, I think, Anne Bowkins, and ending with Moonlight, Joy McMillan. And so it just has a title card, title of the film, name of the editor, name of the director, and then a 1-minute clip of the film. And it's really cool to watch because you just see the history of cinema. It's really fun. Anyway.
I mean, one of the things is that women were marginalized in the film industry for many years, but the one position that was open to women was editing or script supervising, for example. And so, and as we come to understand film better, part of the story here is that editors should be more recognized than they are. They're critically
male
important to the
and
outcome.
female editors, for sure.
Because editors really are the director of the third phase and the final phase of the production.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm really curious in relation to your question. Having seen all of these films, and I know you haven't seen a comparable edit of that film by a man. What do you perceive as the differences in the edit?
Oh my God, the age-old question. I can't answer that because, as you say, we don't have a controlled experiment where, you know, a man and a woman get the same footage and cut it together. And there's been a lot of discussion about that. Some people would say there is a difference, other people would say there isn't. And I think editing is a very personal thing. Everybody has their own rhythm, their own sense of like what a performance is like, you know, how a story flows, and you know, one man and woman can approach something in very much the same way, and then so I don't know. But
it would be a great experiment now to take some of those films and have them.
Yeah. In my experience, women editors are more meticulous, observant, and you know, if I have a choice, I mean, it's, you know, obviously it's the person that you hire, but I had one editor who was a very extremely difficult personality, but she was a great editor, and I endured her for 3 films. And the woman who recommended her to me, I had lunch with 2 weeks ago, and I said, you know, she said, don't tell me, you know, she's extremely difficult, but she's a great editor. And then when I couldn't afford her anymore, she would still come in and do polish edits. And on one of the polish edits, I suggested one edit in the movie I made, Wetware, that she vociferously disagreed with and said she'd never work with me again. This is after working with her for like 10 years. And it was like, okay, and we would have dinner sometimes, you know, in between, we maintained a friendly relationship. And but it was totally in keeping with the situation. So I lost this great editor and she was right, actually. The thing that she disagreed with me about, she was right. Which I would have said perfectly easily. But just the fact that I did, anyway, it was nuts. Because the other thing about editors, they're in this dark space for months on end. And you can find, and one of the great qualities of an editor is to be very user-friendly. You know, my son's an editor, and it's because he's such an easygoing, friendly guy that difficult editors will work with him because he's very amenable. Right. So that's part of it too, personality in choosing an editor. But I found women editors to be better than men editors, generally speaking, but that's just my own experience.
if Walter Murch worked for you for free, would you refuse to work with him?
No, and he's a good guy. I interviewed him about a year ago. He's a lovely guy.
Yeah, he's amazing.
Yeah. And actually, Andy Weisblum, who has 3 Academy Award, he got his start with me as an assistant editor, and he's a great editor, you know, but anyway.
We should.
Yeah. Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you.